be the shortest of sermons, and number two, I haven't memorized it. One of the reasons I haven't memorized it is because on occasion I have gone up prepared for a sermon, and then the Father said to me, well, that's a nice sermon, let's go on with this thing now instead. So, everything I've written here I'm not necessarily going to read, and I'm going to start off with something I don't have written down here. First of all, you've heard my name is Mattias, my wife's name is Tracy. I have two children, ages 10 and 5, Isaac and Yakira. I am not married to my first spouse. I am divorced. And to say that that hit me like a ton of bricks when it happened is a huge understatement. What caused it? Well, depends on who you talk to. There's my version of the truth. There's her version of the truth. There's Yahweh's version of the truth. What I can tell you is this: 3 weeks into the honeymoon, and it was a 9-week honeymoon in Europe, we were tenting in the middle of this field in Belgium. I heard the door to her heart slam shut. I knew she had changed her mind about me. I didn't know why. 2.5 years later, as we were getting divorced, I asked her, so when did you change your mind about me? And she said, about 3 weeks into the honeymoon. Now, God has spoken into my life numerous times. He has done numerous miracles in my life. And why am I telling you I'm divorced? Because you deserve to know. You will find that there are many divorcees in the congregations and in the churches. Is divorce right? Well, it certainly is not intended by Yahweh. When he created them Adam and Eve. He created two people. And he meant for them to live together for all time. But he also knew they wouldn't. Lucifer was not an accident. The deceit that happened in the Garden of Eden was not an accident. It was all part and taken into account by him. He knew everything that was going to transpire from the moment he created Adam until the very last day of creation. He knows it all. Nothing catches him by surprise. He had told me that he had a place for me in ministry. And now I'm divorced. You know what it means to be divorced if you're a Baptist, which is where I grew up? It means you are no longer fit for the ministry, and if you are used in ministry, you're still tainted goods. To say that I went into a tailspin is a huge understatement. You have no idea how depressed I was. And I'm not going to dwell on that. What I'm going to tell you is this. After a severe depression lasting over 6 months, one day the Lord arrived, woke me up. I was in bed, 2 o'clock in the morning. And he said, it's time for you to forgive your ex. And I said, I don't think so. I had a list 4 hours long as to why I did not have to forgive this woman. And I could justify everything. The only problem is rebuttal to my diatribe. After you let me carry on for 4 hours, he said something along these lines. If ever in the history of the world there was anybody who was ever hurt and didn't deserve it, that person was me. If ever in the history of the world there was anybody who was persecuted when he didn't deserve it, that person was me, etc., etc., etc. If ever in the history of the world there was one person who died and didn't deserve to die, that person was me. I forgave. What gives you the right not to? 4 hours of argument just went up in smoke. Okay, so, forgiveness. Now I'm still divorced. I'm still going to a Baptist church at the time. How do I reconcile your call, Yahweh, with my status? And what he said to me was, well, look at it this way. According to the church's standings, I wouldn't be fit for ministry either.
That's true. Good point.
Okay? You're divorced. Yes, I am. And guess what? The church doesn't decide who I send out for ministry.
Amen.
I do that.
Amen. That's good.
And if I have a place for you in my ministry, then I have a place for you in my ministry.
Yes. Yeah.
So, fast forward all these years. I am married to a wonderful woman.
Amen.
I am blessed with two very rowdy, very rambunctious, and very opinionated children, whom I love dearly, and I wouldn't trade them for anything in this world. So, having given that as a preface, let's take a look at what Yeshua says in speaking with the Pharisees and to his people. Yeshua said to them, "Isn't this the reason that you go astray? Because you are ignorant both of the Tanakh and of the power of God. For when people rise from the dead, neither man nor women marry. They are like angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, haven't you read in the book of Moshe, in the passage about the bush, how God said to him, 'I am the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov.' He is God, not of the dead, but of the living. You are going far astray." Mark 12:28. One of the Torah teachers came up and heard them engaged in this discussion. Seeing that Yeshua answered them well, he asked him, "Which is the most important mitzvah of them all?" Yeshua answered, "The most important is, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you are to love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your understanding, and with all your strength." In case you're wondering, I'm reading from the Complete Jewish Bible. The second is this: you are to love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other mitzvah greater than these. What does it mean to love God, to love your neighbor, and to love yourself? Now, if I take a look at that small section, you could run 3 good series of sermons on each one of those 3. We don't have enough time for that. So we're going to take a look at the second one, which is where the Lord has been leading me this week. Love your neighbor. We are a Messianic Jewish congregation, and so we will be taking a look at this from a number of perspectives, including the Orthodox Jewish, because sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What do I mean by that? Well, we still have Judaism, so to speak, as part of this congregation, but we are also Christians. We have the full message from Genesis through Revelation. I will at points be making reference to the Talmud and to other rabbis. This is not something I do generally. As a matter of fact, this is the first time I feel I've been asked to look at these things, but only for a little bit, and only to make a point. Judaism teaches that caring for others is the fuel for a vibrant life. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. They use this passage to indicate that love is fuel for a vibrant life. Okay. Love your neighbor is also the universal golden rule, which the Talmud defines as a great principle of Judaism. How we treat others is a litmus test of our spiritual health. Since God is the ultimate giver, our pursuit of godliness is driven by acts of giving. Judaism teaches this. This all sounds very good. Okay. When I give, I become more embracing and inclusive of the world. I expand my personal investment portfolio of the people I've helped. Seeing that bit of self in another attaches me emotionally and endears me to them. In this way, the giving actually leads to love. They teach this. The biggest beneficiary of kindness is the one performing it. Significantly, the Hebrew word for give, hav, is the etymological root of ahava, which means love. Giving and love are tied in with each other. All sounds good. So, if you forgive others their offenses, this is Matthew 6, verses 14 to 15, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their offenses, your heavenly Father will not forgive yours. So how does this fit in? The biggest recipient of forgiveness is the person doing the forgiving. Now, I told you I went into a tailspin with my divorce. When I decided to obey Yahweh and forgive my ex, I came out of my tailspin. It took 6 months of forgiving to come out of it completely. The first day I forgave her 3 times. The second day I forgave her 3 times. That went on for 2 weeks. Then it was down to twice a day for 2 weeks. Then once a day for 2 weeks. And so on and so forth. And after 6 months, the Father said to me, I can see that you have forgiven her. It was evident in my life. The bitterness that was gone, the hurt, the anger, the acrimony, it dissipated. Why did it dissipate? Because I practiced loving him and forgiving her. Okay? Let's take a look at what Yeshua says in Luke 23:34. Father, forgive them. Why? Because they don't understand what they are doing. And when does he say that? On the cross. If anybody had a right not to forgive, it was him. He forgave. What right do we have not to forgive? I'm not saying it's always easy. How many people are familiar with the following verse? Money is the root of all evil. Okay. Are you sure you know that verse? It's not in my Bible. The love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money. Okay. I could go on with some other misconceptions. Why am I bringing these up? Because sometimes we read these words. We read our Bibles, and we think we understand them. And guess what? We don't. There are rabbis who have memorized everything from Genesis through Malachi, every single word. They know it all. They can repeat it back to you, word by word, comma by comma, so to speak. There is no comma in Hebrew, forgive me. But they know it. And yet, they don't. Because they are missing something. They are seeking a Yahweh, a God, based on acts. And try as we might, our acts are never sufficient to make us acceptable to him. It doesn't work that way. Acts are required, but those acts come out of a relationship with him.
That's right.
Practically speaking, one becomes a giver by focusing on the needs of others. What are they feeling? What are their worries? How can I help? We should be concerned with others' needs as we are with our own. This is what separates the good shepherd from the uncaring hired hand. Orthodox rabbis speak of chasing kindness. It means going out of our comfort zone to actively seek opportunities to give with the sole motivation to care for the welfare of others. Giving selflessly is the key. The giving of charity is regarded as a higher level when performed anonymously, as it is not tainted with the motivation of honor-seeking. However, Orthodox rabbis also say one valid reason for not giving anonymously is to help inspire others to give. Think about that for a moment. You are going to inspire others to give by not giving anonymously. Sounds good. What does Yeshua have to say about it? We'll back to that in a little while. Furthermore, what is the key to a successful, happy marriage? The foundation of any relationship is a focus on, according to the rabbis, giving. Okay? How can I best contribute to the other's welfare? If both partners share this attitude, the relationship flows beautifully in both directions, building connection and a common bond of unity and love. But when the focus is on taking, what will he or she do for me? The dynamic pulls in the opposite direction, away from the spouse, and creates tension and strain. Giving starts at home. It's one of the foundation stones of a loving and enduring marriage. So we're told. We're also all familiar with the golden rule. What's the golden rule? As you would have done unto you, right? Okay. However, Judaism has the negative version of the same, according to Hillel. What is hateful to you, do not do unto others. Understand? Similar idea. Different focus. The idea is to think how it would feel to be on the receiving end of indignities and injustices we would rather be spared. Now, the rabbis list some of the examples of what is hateful to you as follows. Don't embarrass others. Don't gossip or speak negatively about others. Don't take revenge. Don't disturb another person's concentration or sleep. Don't keep others waiting. Don't display anger towards others, and protect others from injury or loss. Looking at some of the items in this list, I do have one question. Anybody have small kids? Let's see now. My kids take revenge on each other. They keep others waiting. Boy, do they keep others waiting. They interrupt my sleep and my concentration constantly. You get the picture? So, why am I having a problem with this? Well, number one, it's the focus. It sounds good, don't do to others what you don't want done to yourself. But when we focus on the negatives, we are still giving focus to the negatives. It's not where it ought to be. The focus needs to be on the positive, which is where Yeshua pointed it. If we focus on doing unto others as we would have done to ourselves, if we focus on the positives, the negatives go away. They don't have a chance to work their way in. But if we focus on the negatives, and there are health professionals today, psychologists, etc., who will tell you the same, stay away from looking at the negative because they can work their way in and still affect you. Let's take a look at empathy versus sympathy. An important way to build a kindness muscle is to empathize with others' problems. Imagine your friend is in a deep, dark hole. Sympathy means standing at the top of the hole, peering in and saying, that's hard. Empathy means crawling into the hole and being there with them. Okay? This is what some rabbis believe. So, let me put it to you this way. The way to build empathy, and there are people who live in literal garbage dumps in Central America and other places. They literally live in a garbage dump. Their house consists of castaway boxes. Okay? So the way to build empathy for these people is to live in the garbage dump until society changes, and the dump is, what? Cleaned up? Removed? Transformed into free luxury rent suites for the poor? I mean, what do you expect? I think there's more to empathy than just moving into the dump with people who are already there. To inure this principle against varying moods and circumstances, Torah states, love your neighbor is an obligation. It's not something you can, put off until later or whenever you feel like it. This is an obligation. You must do this. It is a mistake to wait until we're emotionally inspired to help others. People are influenced by their actions, and eventually our emotions will catch up with our deeds. This is true. Sometimes we may not feel like doing something, but as we do it, things change. When Yahweh gave his commandments to his people, did he say, keep my commandments when you start feeling like it? No. These are my commandments. You will keep them now. And as you start living these commandments out in your life, as you start forgiving, guess what? You will find it easier to forgive again. And the more you forgive, the easier forgiveness becomes as a way of life. This does not mean that you will always have an easy life. Let me tell you, my wife and I have gone through a lot together. I'm not going to tell you my wife's story, and I'm not going to tell you everything we've gone through in the last 10 years. We don't have enough time for that. What I will tell you is, when we want to forgive, and when we want to walk in love, God moves mountains. So before we came back to Canada, I knew I had to talk to people. I knew I had to make things right, and I knew I couldn't get a hold of everybody. So the people that I thought I had offended or had possibly risked having offended, I contacted every single one of them to make sure that everything was straightened out before we left. But there were 2 people I couldn't reach. Didn't know their phone number, didn't have their email address, didn't know where they were living, had no way to get a hold of them. Tracy knows what happened. We were sitting in the airport, Houston, in the plane, about to depart from Houston, when I get a ding on my phone. I just got an email. Guess from whom? Those 2 people I could not get a hold of. Now, the Lord had been telling them about us, but without mentioning our names. They knew they had to pray for somebody. They didn't know who. And so they were calling around to everybody, and they said, well, we've called everybody else. You're the only ones left. It had to be you. And it was. And so because I finally had their email, I was able to talk to them. Do you see how God works? I'll give you another example of a miracle he did in our lives. One day I ran over a pipe that connected our 2 cisterns of water to our house. 15,000 liters of water. Gone. When I ran over that pipe with a lawnmower. Plastic pipe, all the water gone. We were just entering the dry season, and we needed that water.
In Israel? Where were you at? Where were you?
I was in Belize. Now, Belize has 2 seasons, unlike the 4 we have here, wet and dry. And when it's dry, I mean it's dry. It doesn't rain much. So I went to the store, bought the items I needed, got the piping, some additional shut-off valves so that wouldn't happen again. Then I said to the father, well, Father, we have a bit of a problem here. If possible, please send some rain our way so that we can refill these tanks. It doesn't have to be right away, but please send some rain. Well, he didn't. It may have rained a little bit that evening. Tracy says it did. I don't remember it. But whatever it was just a light smattering, and might have put that much into the bottom of one of the tanks. These tanks were like this big around, and well, the tallest one was taller than me, taller than I could reach my hand. Would you like to know how full they were the next morning? Completely full. 15,000 liters full. I want you to understand, we have a God who goes way beyond what we ask of him. He is not a casual God. He is an intense God. He is a loving God who, from the beginning, participated in a cosmic conspiracy. What was that cosmic conspiracy? It was to save us. Who else said, you will strike his heel, but he will crush your head? And when did that happen? So, love your neighbor is not a general principle. Keeping the commandments is not a general principle. Life presents myriad opportunities for doing good every day, such as keeping your word, help someone struggling with a load, visit patients at the local hospital, care especially for widows and orphans, be careful with another's property, make peace between 2 people. Don't stand idly by when another's life is in danger. Do any of these sound familiar? Because all of these are in the Torah. Chesed, or giving, means reaching out altruistically with love and generosity to all. The Talmud says that baseless hatred between Jews brought about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And Judaism believes We can rebuild it through unconditional love. You know, I have a little problem with that one. The belief that the temple was destroyed based on baseless hatred between Jews, that was the only reason? If we take a look in Torah for what Yahweh says his reasons are for kicking his people out of the land, that wasn't the only reason. There was more to it than that. Now, most of Orthodox Judaism doesn't have the same beliefs that Messianic Judaism does. It doesn't see the hand of God in their eviction for the most part, because they reject who Messiah is. Now, Messiah said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. His death alone was not the only reason. And hatred between Jews was not the only reason. There are many others. If we don't open up our Bibles to read what God actually says and how it applies to us, how will we ever be able to stand before Him knowing what we have to apologize for, knowing what we have to acknowledge as sin in our lives for? Isn't that right? Let me go a little bit further with Judaism for a little bit. This has to do very much with who your neighbor is. There's a rabbi in Israel, Rabbi David Bar Chaim, who is also in the Israeli Defense Force. Okay? And his opinion of your neighbor is, shall we say, a whole lot more restrictive than most people, as far as he's concerned, unless you are a Jew, number one, and an Orthodox observant Jew, number two, and in his case it's more like an ultra-Orthodox observant Jew. You're not. You're not a neighbor. You're barely family. That's the extent of the division within that land. Is that what God wants of His people? Now, we read earlier that even the foreigner living in the land was to be what? Treated in the same manner as a native born. When Yeshua came, He came to teach us how to live and how to die. And we can die while we're still alive. What do I mean by that? We must die to ourselves on a daily basis. We don't put ourselves on the throne. His place is on that throne. We don't put ourselves first. His way is first. And His way might mean you take care of that person before you take care of yourself. One of the things that Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Chaim says, we learned from the Mechilta that a Jew who killed a Gentile with intent is not put to death by the Beit Din as he would be had he killed a Jew. Think about that for a second. If a Jew kills a Gentile, no consequence. And it must be pointed out that a Jew who wanted to engage himself in the saving of the life of a Gentile, which involved a transgression of the Sabbat, and did so in front of witnesses and after being warned, is put to death by the Beit Din, this is self-evident. You can't save a Gentile's life even on the Sabbath.
Wow.
Exactly. This is one of the problems within Israel. Why am I talking about this? Because it's no less true of the church. If I were to say the number 45,000 to you, what might that mean to you? There are over 45,000 Protestant denominations. Does that sound like we are a people divided? And that was 20 years ago. How many different denominations we have these days? I don't know. I don't want to know. In His kingdom, there is going to be one denomination. There's going to be one truth. There's going to be one God. There's going to be one people. Yeshua went again into a synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to accuse him of something, people watched him carefully to see if it would heal him on the Shabbat. He said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Come up here, where we can see you." Then, to them he said, "What is permitted on Shabbat? Doing good or doing evil? Saving life or killing?" But they said nothing. Then looking them over and feeling both anger with them and sympathy for them at the stoniness of their hearts, he said to the man, "Hold out your hand." As he held it out, it became restored. The Perishim went out and immediately began plotting with some members of Herod's party how to do away with him. We're talking about doing good, about healing a fellow Jew. But because he did it on the Sabbath, which was against their custom, not against God's law, they were ready to do away with him. Is there any law against helping a neighbor get his donkey out of a well on the Sabbath? No. Saving a life is always permitted, even on the Sabbath. If saving a life is permitted, why wouldn't healing by the God of all creation be permitted? Let me tell you, or let me recite to you 3 Hebrew words. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Sounds simple and clear. However, how are we to love the neighbor? And who is my neighbor? Not only are the interpretations different in all the traditions of Judaism, what is true disparities, but there are also differences within the same tradition of Judaism. What is true of the disparities in Judaism is also true of Christianity. I have had numerous conversations with numerous pastors about different things. Some will tell you that the law no longer exists. Period. There is no law. Some will tell you that the law, the 10 Commandments still exist, but everything else is out of the picture. Some will tell you that these days there must be a guiding principle because Yeshua has done it all. We don't need to worry about it anymore. Well, one of the things I said to them, and I was surprised when I heard that there was another Messianic rabbi who said the same thing that I did, I addressed it somewhat like this. So what you're telling me is the law doesn't exist anymore. Are you sure about that? Are you aware of what the consequence of that statement entails? He says, yeah, we don't have any, no worries. Okay, so there's no law. That means there's no consequence, which means that I can come to your house, I can rob you blind, I can kill you, I can do unspeakable things to your wife and children. There's no consequence, right? Is that what you're saying? Because if there's no law and there's no consequence, that's exactly what you're saying. Is that the life you want to be living in? Is that the society that you want to be a part of? Because that's not love. That's a free ticket to do whatever you want and be as hedonistic as you want. So how do we live out our lives? What does it mean to love your neighbor? Exodus 19:5-6. Now if you will pay careful attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you will be a kingdom of Kohanim for me, a nation set apart. These are the words you are to speak to the people of Israel. A people of what? What are they to be? A kingdom of priests. Now, my wife has heard me say this many times, Priests do not minister to themselves. They do not restrict their ministry strictly to their own family. What's the point? If that was what a priest was supposed to do. If the entire nation is to be a kingdom of priests, to whom do they minister if not to the nations? Right? Okay. If they minister to the nations, how can you build a wall of division and exclusion between the nation of Israel and other nations? It can't be there. It would be completely against everything God wants. Furthermore, Isaiah 66, 18-21 has the following to say. The time is coming when I will gather together all nations and languages. They will come and see my glory. And I will give them a sign. I will send some of their survivors to the nations of Tarshish, Pul, Lud, Tuval, Greece, and more distant coasts, where they have neither heard of my fame nor seen my glory. They will proclaim my glory in these nations, and they will bring all of your kinsmen out of all the nations as an offering to Adonai, on horses, in chariots, in wagons, on mules, on camels, to my holy mountain, Yerushalayim, says Adonai. Just as the people of Israel themselves bring their offerings in clean vessels to the house of Adonai, I will also take Kohanim and Leviim from them. He will take Kohanim and Leviim from them. There are two ways you can interpret that. Number one, Kohanim and Leviim likewise have been dispersed into these nations, and he's going to come gather them out of them. Or, just like happened with the first Exodus, when there was a group of people who were not Hebrews that came up with the Hebrews, and what happened with them? They were absorbed into the tribes. And some of them may have become Levites. It's possible if they were dispersed among the tribes. Now, if he is indeed going to take some of the Gentiles and make them Kohanim and Leviim, that will be unlike anything he's ever done before. And how wondrous would that be? Matthew 22:37, he told them, you are to love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, the greatest and the most important mitzvah. And the second is similar to it. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. You heard me mention that love your neighbor as yourself is a golden principle. But is it fair to call it a principle? Principles can be interpreted. Can we interpret that? Or must we obey it? If it's a command, it cannot be interpreted. It must be understood in the manner he wants it to be understood. Do you understand what I'm saying? Love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't love yourself, how can you love somebody else? There are lots of people who don't love even themselves. One of the things we have to do is to show them light, to show them what it means to love them. Some people cannot fathom that they are even worth loving. There was a time I didn't believe it. Well, the rabbis thought that not giving honestly would inspire others to give. And Yeshua says, but when you do tzedakah, don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Then your tzedakah will be in secret, and your Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you. Is anonymous giving more important to God or less? I think he would rather you do it anonymously. He'll reward you. I'll let you decide which one you should emulate. I know which I believe in. Now let's take a look at Matthew 22:41 and following. Turning to the assembled Parashim, Yeshua put a sheila to them. Tell me your view concerning the Messiah. Whose son is he? They said to him, David's. Then how is it, he asked them, that David, inspired by the Spirit, calls him Lord when he says, Adonai said to my Lord, sit here at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If David thus calls him Lord, how is he his son? No one could think of anything to say in reply, and from that day on, no one dared put to him another Sheila. Didn't question him again. It's like, okay, we got burned. We're going to stay away from this guy. He's just going to embarrass us. Jesus is saying to the Pharisees that the Messiah, whoever he is Lord even over the most honored and powerful human rulers. He is more than another king in succession to the great kings of the past. We may call him king, or King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but what does that have to do with loving God and loving your neighbor? It is most important to understand that we understand how the commandments are related to the nature of the one who is there teaching about them. When Yeshua was a young boy, and his family went to Jerusalem for one of the feasts, what happened? They went home. He didn't. What was he doing?
Teaching.
He was confounding the priests, the Pharisees. He was confounding the Levites. He was making them look bad. And finally his parents came, found him, and said, Son, what are you doing? We've been waiting for you. I said, well, I have to be about my Father's business. He came to reveal the truth. He came to drive away the darkness, the doubt, the fear. He came to show what it means to love. By showing us how the commandments relate to him. Luke 10:29. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Yeshua, who's my neighbor? Taking up the question, Yeshua said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him naked, beat him up, and I think you know the rest, right? Okay. So what does this Samaritan do? He stops. He gets off his horse, so to speak. He binds up the man, treats his wounds, takes him to a nearby inn, and takes 2 days' wages out of his pocket and says, here's the money to treat this person. If you incur any other expenses, I will cover the cost myself when I return. Let's say you're earning $25 an hour, which is not an unusual rate of pay. 8 hours a day, $200, 2 days, $400. $400 to take care of a guy. Should be enough to take care of most needs, unless this guy needs, severe hospitalization. But how many of us would do that? The instructive thing here is that when Yeshua told this parable, who was put in opposition to the Samaritan? The priests and the Levites. What was a Samaritan in the eyes of a Jew? He was nothing. They wanted nothing to do with the Samaritans. Faced with a journey through Samaria, most Jews would go around Samaria. A journey which could add several days to whatever journey they were going to take. So when Yeshua goes through Samaria, stops in Samaria, at a well, and speaks to a Samaritan woman, what kind of an impact do you think that might have had? Okay? It had an impact for the apostles. It likewise had an impact for the Samaritans. First, he had an impact with one woman, who then quickly runs off and says, I've met him. Who? The Messiah. And she brings everybody she can find. And what does he do? He reveals to them the word. What made the difference? Jesus made that difference. Community serves as part of the mission of the body of believers. How we understand it can be seen in the mission of Jesus himself. He came into Galilee proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. His actions in driving out evil spirits and in healing the sick were part of his proclamation. This is who I am. This is what it means that I have come to you. He came to us because there is no way we could go to him. After Yochanan had been arrested, Yeshua came to the Galilee, proclaiming the good news from God. The time has come, God's kingdom is near. How do we know God's kingdom is near? Because his power is evident. Turn to God from your sins and believe the good news. They went into Capernaum, and on Shabbat Yeshua went into the synagogue and began teaching. They were amazed at the way he taught, for he did not instruct them like the Torah teachers, but as one who had authority himself. Just in their synagogue, just then was a man with an unclean spirit in him who shouted, "What do you want with us, Yeshua from Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, Yeshua shuts that down real quick. Why? Why does he shut down the proclamation of who he is by the adversary? Because what it means to the Messiah, from his perspective, was very different from what it meant to be Messiah from their perspective. Israel was looking for a Messiah. They're looking for two Messiahs. Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. The suffering servant and the kingly Messiah. The one they wanted was the kingly Messiah, the one who would drive out the Romans, who would establish Israel as an independent nation, who would be ruler over them with just laws, etc. God wasn't what they wanted. And what they needed wasn't something they were prepared to see. And so he shuts it down. Because what God wanted them to see wasn't something they were yet prepared to see. Even his own disciples, his own apostles, were not ready at this time to truly understand who he was and what he had to do. This was still in the future for them. The fact that he spoke with authority and had the ability to work miracles that none of the religious leaders could hope to match should have been a wake-up call. What should it have reminded them of? This guy works miracles that nobody can match. Nobody has ever done all the things he's doing. Well, who before Yeshua had done miracles that nobody else could match? Moses. Moses did miracles that nobody else could match, right? And who did Moses confront? He confronted Pharaoh. Who else did he confront? He confronted those religious leaders in the tribe, the elders, shall we say, who had a different opinion about how things should be done than he did. So, we're in Egypt. Moses confronts Pharaoh. 10 plagues. Israel comes out. We have the splitting of the Red Sea, destruction of Pharaoh's army. Now what happens? Now we have 10 tests. And who are the tests for? For the children of Israel. So who did Moses confront? He confronted the enemy and he confronted the Israelites. And what is Jesus doing? He's confronting the adversary and he's confronting Israel. The same person, so to speak. When he comes before us, will we understand that he is going to confront us as well? Where does judgment start? It starts in the house, and it works its way out. If it doesn't start here, we're in the wrong place. When John the Baptist wanted to know whether Jesus was the one who was to come or whether they were to expect some other, the message he sent back clearly linked the signs of the coming of the kingdom with his being the one who was to come. Yeshua answered in Matthew 11:4, "Go and tell Yochanan what you are hearing and seeing. The blind are seeing again, the lame are walking, People with tzara'at are being cleansed, the deaf are hearing, the dead are being raised, the good news is being told to the poor, and how blessed is anyone not offended by me. You understand? When we come in the presence and the power of God, there will be miracles. If they're not happening, we need to ask, why not? There's a direct parallel here with the commission that he gave to the 12 and to the 70. As you go, proclaim the kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those afflicted with tzara'at, expel demons. You have received without paying, so give without asking for payment. When the 70 reported back, again, the same images appear. Miracles. We take part through the gifts of the Spirit, and that is how the disciples were empowered. Okay, the gifts of the Spirit are gifts for ministry, some to be apostles, some prophets, some teachers, some pastors, and some teachers. Ephesians 4, 1 Corinthians 12, etc. Okay? If we take a look at Ephesians 4, verse 7 and on, I'll start with verse 8. After he went up into the heights, he led captivity captive, and he gave gifts to mankind. Now this phrase, he went up, what can it mean if not that he first went down into the lower parts, that is the earth? Where did he go? Yeah, where?
Sheol.
Yeah. Well, paradise, so to speak, Sheol was divided into pieces. One was paradise, one was a place of torment, right? He went to the portion of Sheol, which was paradise. Those people were the ones he gave that message to because they hadn't heard the message yet. They had been faithful to what they knew. Now they got to know more, and now he brings them out. Okay? So he went down there. Then we have the story in the New Covenant about them people seeing the dead, etc. This is what it means to love your neighbor. Walking with that kind of power. Understanding him for who he is by his passion and his love for us. The fruits of the Spirit are listed in Galatians 5, 22 to 23. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, humility, self-control. Nothing in the Torah stands against such things. Nothing. The fruits of the Spirit result in a transformation of the world. Through the lives of people transformed and exuding through the exercise of the gifts the power of God. These gifts come from the very essence of God. They are not simply moral choices or the outworking of human potential. It is due to the victory that the Messiah won and of that peace and unity for which he both prayed and sacrificed himself. The point is that the goals and values of human services in terms of human understanding and welfare are intimately related not only to the man, but also to his being the Son of God. He is the one with the power to pour out these gifts. When we go on a mission directed by God, we participate in a cosmic drama, the likes of which Hollywood has never imagined. Our acts of love are a step along the road to fulfillment of the law of love in the kingdom of the Lord for the one who enables us to share in his work and for the flock he loves. So, if we want to look at some concrete examples of how to love your neighbor, let's take a look at Leviticus 19. Okay? And every time I lift my hand, please respond, I am Adonai your God. As you've already made note of. Adonai said to Moshe, speak to the entire community of Israel. Tell them you are to be holy because I, Adonai your God, am holy. Every one of you is to revere his father and mother, and you are to keep my Shabbats. I, Adonai your God. Do not turn to idols and do not cast metal gods for yourselves. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to Adonai, offer it in a way that will make you accepted. It is to be eaten the same day you offer it and the following day, but if any of it remains until the third day, it is to be burned up completely. If any of it is eaten on the third day, it will have become a disgusting thing and will not be accepted. Why? Okay. We are to be a holy people. To save a life is a good thing. Correct? If God is anything, because he is the creator of life, it is that he is a God of life. Death is the antithesis of what God is. But if we have a sacrifice which is intended for life left over for a longer period of time, death can start to set in. That is why you can't have a sacrifice left over. Understand? Exactly. No refrigeration. Okay? That's why it will have become a disgusting thing. Can't have it. Okay? Moreover, anyone who eats it will bear the consequences of profaning something meant for Adonai. That person will be cut off from his people. In other words, I'm not having anything to do with death, and don't you dare do it because this is a severe consequence and I will cut you off. In other words, I ain't fooling around. Got it? Okay. When you harvest the right crops produced in your land, don't harvest all the way to the corners of your field, and don't gather the ears of grain left by the harvesters. Likewise, don't gather the grapes left on the vine or fallen on the ground after harvest. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner, because I am Yahweh your God. Do not steal from, defraud, or lie to each other. Do not swear by my name falsely, which would be profaning the name of your God. I am Adonai. Do not oppress or rob your neighbor. Specifically, you are not to keep back the wages of a hired worker all night until morning. Do not speak a curse against the deaf person or place an obstacle in the way of a blind person. Rather, fear your God. I am Adonai. Do not be unjust in judging. Show neither partiality to the poor nor deference to the mighty, but with justice judge your neighbor. Do not go around spreading slander among your people, but also don't stand idly by when your neighbor's life is at stake. I am Adonai. Do not hate your brother in your heart, but rebuke your neighbor frankly, so that you won't carry sin because of him. Why? So that you won't carry sin because of him. Rebuke your neighbor frankly. In other words, don't hold a grudge, because holding a grudge is going to impact you. It's better to rebuke him frankly and not carry a grudge than to not rebuke him and let yourself be destroyed on the inside out. Rather, love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. Okay? The context of you shall love your neighbor as yourself was not merely a state of mind. It was a way of life. In the context, in the middle of Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself is in the middle of that passage. It's the heart and soul of all of Leviticus 19. You understand what I'm saying? This is how you love your neighbor as yourself. Observe my regulations. Don't let your livestock mate with those of another kind. Don't sow your field with two different kinds of grain. And don't wear a garment of cloth made with two different kinds of thread. If a man has sexual relations with a woman who is a slave intended for another man, and she has neither been redeemed nor given her freedom, there is to be an investigation. They are not to be put to death because she was not free. Some of this is confusing. I'll admit that. I don't necessarily understand it all myself. I'm still asking about a lot of things in the Bible. But I know that he will bring revelation at the time I need it. Okay? In reparation, he's to bring a ram as a guilt offering for himself to the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen will make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering before Adonai for the sin he committed, and he will be forgiven for the sin he committed. When you enter the land and plant various kinds of fruit trees, you are to regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years it will be forbidden to you and not eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit will be holy for praising Adonai. But in the 5th year you may eat its fruit, so that it will produce even more for you. I am Adonai, your God. Do not eat anything with blood. Do not practice divination or fortune-telling. Don't round your hair at the temples or mar the edges of your beard. Don't cut gashes in your flesh when someone dies, or tattoo yourselves, because I am Adonai. Do not turn to spirit mediums or sorcerers. Don't seek them out to be defiled by them, because I am Adonai. If a foreigner stand up in the presence of a person with gray hair, show respect for the old, you are to fear your God, because I am Adonai. If a foreigner stays with you in your land, do not do him wrong. Rather, treat the foreigner staying with you like the native born among you. You are to love him as yourself, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am Adonai, your God. Don't be dishonest when measuring length, weight, or capacity. Rather, use an honest balance scale, honest weights, and an honest bushel dry measure, and an honest gallon liquid measure. I am Adonai, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Observe all my regulations and rulings and do them, because I am Adonai. When we keep his commandments, not only do we keep them with respect to him, we keep them with respect to our neighbor. Our neighbor is not our blood relative or the person who believes things the same way we do. Our neighbor is out there. It is the person we've never met before on the road of life. We are called to be witnesses. We are called to be powerful emissaries. And if we're not seeing miracles working out in our lives, why not? We need to be asking ourselves these questions, because I had to. I had to ask myself, why am I not seeing miracles? I have seen miracles, but I've not seen them the way I want to see them. Do you know what I'm saying? When the apostles were walking down the street and their shadows fell on people, what happened? When somebody touched a handkerchief and passed it down the road, what happened? Are we seeing that in our churches these days? Someone once said, the church cannot say, silver and gold have I none, but neither can we say, rise up and walk. Loving your neighbor, as mentioned, is a way of life. It is not something you do for those who treat you well. It is for all. It isn't when you are in the mood. It's at all times. When Jesus came to this earth, he came not just to die for our sins. He came to show us how to live on a daily basis. The years he spent with the apostles was to show them how the Torah was to be lived out, how all were acceptable to him, no matter their ethnicity. One day he was confronted by a Gentile woman whose child was sick and who was asking for healing. And he said, why are you asking for this? This bread is meant for the children. And she said, it doesn't matter if I'm a dog. Even as dogs get scraps from the table. I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. And what was his response? Yep. He healed. When we take a look at the women listed in the genealogy of the Messiah, how many women are listed? I'm thinking of two in particular. Rahab and Ruth. What do they have in common? Gentiles. Both of them. Gentile women, both of them. Now, Caleb was not Jewish. He was from the mixed multitude. If he finds people acceptable, if he integrates them into his own genealogy, then why don't we act like we matter to him? Because obviously we do. And why do we act like we are better than others? Because we're not. They matter to him. We must bend our knees. We must prostrate ourselves. And like I have had to do more than once in my life, say, Father, forgive me. And help me to reach those whom you want me to reach. We will not be able to reach everybody. It's not going to happen. The world's most effective communicator died on a cross. He couldn't reach everybody because not everybody has a heart, a will, or a love to receive. But those he sends our way, and those he sends us to, reach those. Amen.